Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of SuperCoach Mates. Well, round 9 is done and dusted, and it was a pretty interesting week, I think, from the SuperCoach front. So we've got both Thomas and Jonas here. And just before we get started, we're going to quickly just touch on how we went over the weekend. So I'll start with you, Thomas. How did you go over the weekend? And maybe give us a good player and a bad player from the week.
Yeah, I'd score pretty average. I mean, I'd Rioli Jr. on field, which kind of screwed up about 50 points. So I had Hamilton on the bench. So I ended up on 21-29 with Oliver as captain. So it wasn't the worst in the world. Pretty frustrating because I've got Steele as well, which I'm assuming a fair few people in the same predicament. Obviously, yeah, Rioli was a bit of a shambles. I was driving home from footy and I was here on the radio and I was hearing some good things, but then I saw the score and he had barely moved, so it was a bit frustrating. Probably the best player for the week, probably Bruce, to be fair. I mean, he was the only one that salvaged a 120 plus score, and I guess he's one that you can keep for a while now. I mean, arguably R2 at this rate. If you don't really want to go to anywhere else. Well, obviously, Jonas got Darcy in, so that's a bit of a shit show waiting to happen. But yeah, we'll flip over to you guys. How did you guys go?
I'll go to you, Jonas. How did you go?
I just got over 21-40, so not sensational, but I avoided Steele and Gorn, but copped the GWS combination of Cornelio and Whitfield, so that wasn't very beautiful. And I had Darcy, who I traded in. And looking at my team, there weren't too many that impressed. I think I had one player go over 125, which was Miller. But if I had to give like a best on ground, I'd probably give it to Hewitt with the 121 coming back from that injury. He settled in nicely, so finally was able to repay the faith of having held him for, I think it was 3 weeks. But yeah, I'll pass it on to you, Nathan. How did you go?
Well, I actually scored the worst out of everyone. I barely got over 2,050. So I've only got 2,058 this week. So having Max Gorn as captain didn't help my cause, and having Cornelia and Whitfield also didn't help either. But my player shout out this week, Jane Sicily, 141, highest score in the side. And I think a lot of people have been hurt by not picking him, given his scoring. And I mean, I missed out on Hewitt for him, but he's absolutely repaid the faith. He's probably going to be close to 600k, if not above it this week. So, yeah, and I'll also give a shout out to Tuke Miller. So I think for those that were watching last week, I tossed up between Miller and Brayshaw. I ended up backing in Tuke Miller. And he was actually my second highest score. So, overall, a pretty good week there. The dud, I would like to say Jack Steele, but he got injured, so I think that's a bit low picking. I'm going to go with Patrick Crips, only the 83. I'll go with Max Gorn, actually, because he's my captain. I shouldn't have captained him, given he was under an injury cloud, but I decided to. Only got 73, Crips 83. So yeah, they were a bit of some low scores. But anyway, so we're going to move on now, and we're just going to do just a quick little podcast here, just on some players who didn't do well. I think we've done enough of our podcast with players who've done well, and there's no point reflecting on them. So anyway, so from the Collingwood Western Bulldogs game, we'll start off with let's start off with Nick Dacos. So only 69, bit down on where he has been. What are we doing with Nick Dacos going forward? I'll throw to you, Jonas, since you're a fellow Collingwood supporter. Well, have you still got him, and what are you going to do with him?
Traded him a few weeks ago. I think he's an all right hold, but we've got now Karmas on the bubble, so I think if you're looking to free up some cash, Dacos isn't the worst way to go about it. I think he's not going to make too much more money. I think he's maxed out in price, but he's got rock solid job security. So if you want to hold him through that round 12 bye, which could be a good idea of it, considering a lot of people have a lot of players out. I wouldn't be against it, but if he's your only avenue to a premium that you really like this week, I'd be advocating to go down that path.
Yep, and speaking of Buku Kamis, Thomas, what are you going to do with him this week? Obviously, 66 this week. Probably our first real defensive downgrade. Will you be bringing him in this week to throw up some money, or do you have your question marks over it?
Well, yeah, obviously he's a defender rookie, so there's not many out there, and he pretty much almost seems a must-have, unfortunately for me, because, yeah, obviously with the Steele news didn't help my trade causes with him, because I probably would have done Karmas and Clark in and then a Primo, upgrading a Dacos up to a premium. Having said that, Steele has to go, unfortunately, with his AC joint injury. So, I mean, I could still do it and then basically be behind for a week and then double upgrade next week, which is not the worst thing in the world. Yeah, he looked all right. He obviously helped with 3 goals to his name. Obviously, he's not going to do that every week, but I'm pretty sure I'm pretty confident they'll play him most weeks, because the Bulldogs don't have much representation down forward, with only Aaron Norton. Obviously, Josh Bruce is out still for a while with his ACL injury, so he seems to be a good second or third tall, which is not too bad. Obviously, I don't think you're going to be expecting too many good scores off him. I think he scored like a sub 50 last week as well. Let me just double check that. I'm pretty sure, yeah.
I think it was a bit low.
Karmas. Yeah, 41 off a similar thing, and I can only see, the reason why he scored 60 plus was because he scored those 3 goals. So he's one that I guess in any other position I'd probably pass up on, but because his defense makes him more like, above 50% chance of people getting him, just because, you need one. Is Luke Cleary, what's his position?
I'm just actually looking at that now.
I think he's
a defender as well.
He played a lot like across centre half back. I didn't mind the role, but you definitely want to have another look. I wouldn't.
Yeah, because I was almost saying, like, if you're in a situation where, like for me and probably a few other people, where you haven't got Clark, you need to change up Steele, and you're not desperately in need of a defender rookie, then maybe Cleary might be a better option potentially.
I think Karmas has better job security.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
You have to prioritise that, especially over the round 12 bye, because we're going to have a lot of defenders sitting out and
yes,
need warm bodies.
Yeah, Karmas definitely has better job security. Having said that, I don't know how much he's going to rise in price. I wouldn't say too much. So,
no.
But I'd probably... Yeah, you can either wait. Yeah, it's a tough one, I guess, but I guess we'll speak more on that maybe towards the Q&A podcast. But yeah, he's one that I think people are looking likely to get just because of the need for defender rookies. But I guess, Jonas, you can touch on a few players in the Richmond Hawthorn game, because
I just want to interrupt here. Can I just pick you apart here, Jonas? So 2 weeks ago, he took a pot shot at Dylan Moore and said he wasn't a top forward. I think the last 2 weeks has gone 60 and 50. So, was this something you saw coming, Jonas, or just pure luck? Sorry to take over there.
No, that's a good point. I wouldn't say I saw this coming from back-to-back weeks, but I definitely would have expected him to score similar numbers at stages throughout the year. And the fact that he's done it in back-to-back weeks is obviously unlucky if you brought him in. But as you can see, he's a bit of a small forward and he only had the 14 touches, didn't really hit the scoreboard, so the score's pretty just. He's a good player, but yeah, definitely not a top 6 forward. But onto the Richmond side, I'll touch on quickly Dustin Martin because...
Yes, this is going to be a big one.
He played very well. Played a fair bit of time up forward, which is evident given the fact he kicked 3 goals. Is he someone you'd ever look at bringing in, Tom?
Yeah, maybe. He's one that's burnt me too many times. He burnt me completely last year, but it seems like he's come off his mental health break. He seems refreshed, and I think the pleasing thing is he's doing this off playing predominantly forward. So as soon as they want to unleash him into the midfield, it could spell danger for other teams. Yeah, he's one that I like over the likes of Isaac Heaney. I think if you had to compare the two, Martin's probably a safer pick going forward. I have my concerns with Heaney pushing forward, not to trade out, of course, but just with his scoring potential moving forward. But yeah, he's one that you probably wouldn't go too badly. It seems like Richmond have regained some form moving into the bye. Whether they can continue this is yet to be seen. But if they can cause a few more, I wouldn't say upsets, but cause them a few more upsets to other teams within the top 8, you'd be definitely looking towards a few more Richmond players. And I think the only thing that's stopping me from saying he's kind of, you have to get him within the next couple of weeks is there's just so many of those Dogs players that obviously not into the bye, but after the bye, you look at the likes of Liberatore, who's already a forward. Tim English, once he comes back, you've got Bontempelli and Bailey Smith likely to get forward status. That's already 4 Dogs players, and we saw against Collingwood, for example, you could have all of them and they could all score over 100 and 100 comfortably. They're pretty much the most Supercoach friendly team in the comp, which makes 2 more spots left if you think about it like that. And then you've got
and
Parker.
You're not even mentioning Dunkley.
Yeah, well, Dunkley. Yeah, that's number 5, I think. And then you've got Parker, who probably rounds out a 6 if you want to get, if you want to count your top 6 forwards as pure scoring potential. Obviously, probably not likely going to have all 5 Dogs players just because of price. But yeah, he's one that I guess wouldn't be a bad point of difference, especially because obviously most people would have gotten rid of him unless you don't play the game anymore. And yeah, bringing him in early would be quite nice. Obviously, I think they've got the round 12 bye, so I wouldn't bring him too early. But they play Essendon Dreamtime at the G, and he will score well there against a pretty shitty Essendon. They play Sydney after that, which is pretty rough, and then they've got the bye. So yeah, he's one that you want to look closely, and if he gets that mid-time back into him, moving into finals would be pretty much the perfect time to get, because we all know what he's capable of.
I think last week I touched on this too. I don't think Richmond are the same side that they were a couple of years ago. And I think he sort of could perhaps only throw out a 95 average, and the side around him were good enough to sort of allow him to be a little bit quieter and have him, peak at the right time. But I think this year he's going to have to do what he did in 2017. Where we averaged, I think it was about 120. If Richmond are going to make finals, because they don't have the same side. They're a few years older now, and he's probably the one player who's at the peak of his powers still. So I think he's going to have to keep doing this for Richmond to actually sort of get into finals and potentially even look at the top 4. So I would agree with both of you, and I think I'd just about have him as the number 1 trade target up in the forward line.
Really?
This week. Yeah, it's a big call, but I think he's going to have to keep doing this. He's going to get more midfield minutes. I think he's only going to get better from here. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth on.
All right.
Dustin Martin.
Moving on, as Tommy 10 says in the live game chat on the right side, Rioli Jr., you spud. Without saying I told you so, he did say on the podcast Rioli was Rose's 2.0 with the bad one. And I think that score has thrown his job security in question. But I'll throw this over to you, Tom. What do you make of his game, and do you think he's going to reignite some cash generation?
Yeah, definitely didn't expect a 7, which was a problem. He's one that the only reason why, and we've obviously spoke about this off air, that he might not lose his spot is because they play Dreamtime at the G. He's obviously, Indigenous player, and it'd be pretty good experience for him to play on that ground. I could see him thriving on that ground. I think when they played in Darwin, Irving Mosquito was a similar player that, went nuts on that at that night. So, and I think Marlon Pickett is going to be suspended for his hit on Dylan Moore. So that's one spot that opens up for him to kind of save. He's one that I think it was always going to be coming. The poor squad, obviously not this poor. But from what I was hearing, I didn't watch the game at all. I was listening on the radio to it when I could, and the commentators seemed to heap a lot of praise on him. Not necessarily for his possessions, because he got none of it, but his pressure off the ball, and it seems like he's providing or reigniting that pressure forward role really well for Richmond. So he could actually be not as bad job security wise as people think. Obviously, you wouldn't be surprised if he loses his spot over the weekend, but I guess you should be at that stage now where you're not relying too heavily on rookies like him to be on your field. They should be in your bench at best. So he's one that you wouldn't be too worried about going forward, because like Carroll, for example, who was everyone's other pick of the bunch, barely scored much more. He scored about 20 points more, where everyone thought he was the must-have. So it's one of those things where, you take obviously it's a shit score, and if you copped it on field, it was even worse, and it probably lost me about 50 points, which was pretty frustrating. But yeah, he's one that I think going forward wouldn't be a bad one to put on the emergency based off matchups, because he is capable of getting 3 goals, 14 disposals, and scoring, a 70 to 90 odd when he's on, because he's definitely a good pressure player, but he's still young and he's still got a lot to develop in that forward role. But I think there's a spot for him.
Yeah.
And a big game for him, with the Dreamtime.
Yeah, for sure. I think he can do he's a pretty talented player, and if he kicks a few goals, he can score a 70 or so, and everyone will forget about the 7. But we'll move on to this game, which was a bit of a strange game. Butters scored half well, but that was half expected given the fact that came up against North Melbourne. So I think he's one where you hold, and then at the bye you probably trade. But one player who was tracking along quite nicely up until this game was T. Boak. I'll hand this over to you, Nathan. Do you think that score is a blip on the radar, or a sign that he's slowly his trajectory is slowly going downhill and he's not a top 8 mid?
Well, I think we touched on this last week, that he does have a habit of doing this, where he starts off the season on fire, and then by the end of the year, he's only, like 20th or 25th in the midfielders overall. I don't think he'll score this low again. Although it does say on here he was leading the inside mids, which is a little bit concerning, given the fact that he was in there for most of the game and still only scored 36. So look, I think we flagged him last week as an option for between Miller and Brayshaw, as well as being one of those players to look at bringing in. And we said he was the last one. And I guess this is probably the reason why. But yeah, I don't think he's going to score that low every week. But Tom, I want to ask you about who was it that I wanted to? Sam Hayes. So only 55. He should probably be on your bench anyway. But with a couple of ruckmen who have gone down or might be on the bubble soon, is Sam Hayes still safe in our sides, or should we be perhaps looking at getting rid of him and cashing him in?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't be too stressed about him if you had him on your bench, because he's still going to make a bit more money. Played against Goldstein, which is a tough ask. he was never going to score too well against him. Goldstein's a pretty reliable ruckman and pretty experienced ruckman. If you had him as R2 and still had Sam Hayes as R2 and what's his face at R1, Bruce R1, I'd be a little bit concerned because I guess, you don't have the greatest points on field for this week. But yeah, if you had a Jack Steele, for example, maybe this is a time to switch the flick and get a premium ruckman in. Unfortunately, I think, there's not too many premium ruckmen that you can kind of bring in with confidence at the moment at their price. You've got Gorn, who's just dropped 2 70s in a row. He's going to drop a ton of cash. You've got, obviously, Sean Darcy, who sputtered up this week and is going to drop a bit more cash. And the only one you can bring in with confidence is Jared Witts at this point. So he's one that I guess is not too much of a concern. But yeah, if you definitely have him at R2 and then say a Hugh Dixon at R3, I'd be looking to bring him out at some point.
Yeah.
In the near future.
All right, we'll move on to this game, and I think there's not a lot that needs to be discussed. So try and wrap this up in 2 sentences, and you guys can add on anything you think. I think Tom Stewart, you wait on. His break even will be around 170, and I think you just get him in after his bye. You can probably get him in next week as well, but I don't like trading in players who then have the bye 2 weeks later. And unfortunately for Steele, he's a must trade out. Obviously injured his AC joint or shoulder or something like that, so that's not ideal. And Dangerfield is just straight out not an option after that score. He started the game well, but faded.
Fell away.
Sinclair impressed with the 31 touches. I'll hand this one over to you, Tom. Is he one you can still look at trading in?
Yeah, potentially. It definitely helps now that Steele is gone, Supercoach wise, for some St Kilda midfielders, because obviously the spot opens up. It'll be definitely interesting to see how we go without Steele in the midfield. We did it for the second half against the Cats and won, so it seems like, without Steele in the midfield, we might be forced to rotate a lot through that midfield just to change up our starting 3 and give opposition midfielders a bit of a different look. So the likes of obviously Seb Ross, Brad Crouch, Gresham. Now Sinclair, I reckon, will go in there more often. He's been obviously playing a lot more in the D50, and I think he'll spend a lot more time in the midfield rotating through. And if that's the case, he wouldn't be a bad option. He was one that I was actually considering bringing in this week before the Jack Steele news. But I guess, he's one that the only knock on him is he's prone to these 80s and 90s, because I think just the nature of his footy, like he collects a lot of uncontested footy. He's kind of that link in the chain that doesn't really do much damaging wise. Supercoach, obviously for us, is crucial to how we play. But as you can see there, 31 disposals for only 107 just shows that his ceiling's not quite there. But as a defender, I guess you take 107 with the ups and downs that other defenders might have. But I'll flick this one to you, Nathan, just to give you a quick reply on this one. But obviously you're another Steele owner.
I am.
What are your plans of getting rid of Steele? Because I know, Rory Laird is your option. I know you try to keep him low down for the last 5 weeks, but I think practically every other podcast is going to mention Rory Laird as a must-have trade-in option for Jack Steele. Are you going to trade him to Rory Laird, or is there someone else you've been keeping under the carpet for 10 weeks that you're going to pull out?
No. Rory Laird will be coming in this week. I'm kind of disappointed that he went 150 or 140, whatever he went. He's going to be coming into my side this week for Jack Steele. And he's probably lost a bit of his point of difference value there. I guess I'm unforeseen injuries for Jack Steele, so he's actually going to be more than his starting price, which is just an amazing thing considering the fact that he missed the first 2 weeks and a lot of people obviously passed up on him after that. And yet he's going to end up being, I think he's going to be mid 640s, and everyone's going to be bringing him in. But I think he's a logical option. I think Callum Mills is still going to have a 170 plus break even next week. So, yeah, I think Roy Laird will be very popular this week, unfortunately. So, yeah, I will be joining him. What are you, just quickly before we move on, are you going down the same path?
Yeah, it's probably Rory Laird. If I was going balls out for the rest of the season, I might have picked a Brad Crouch or something silly and see how he go and see if he takes all of Jack Steele's point and goes 150 for the next 10 weeks. But yeah, Rory Laird is probably the way to go.
Yeah. I will just give a shout. Sorry, Tom. I will give a shout out to Against All Odds, whose coach is Jack. I'm not sure if you listen to the podcast. I presume you do. But well done for having Rory Laird this week. He probably was the reason you won. So, just to come back and bite me for trying to keep him under wraps. So, just a little shout out there to Against All Odds. If you're a listener, well done.
Yep. We'll move on to this game. And the man that stands out is Callum Mills. He didn't rack up the pill. He had the 29 touches, but it was his defensive pressure. He had 13 tackles, multiple marks, really efficient with his kicks. Does his Achilles injury history scare you off the pick at all, Tom?
Not really.
No.
I don't think he's past that. It seems like he just if you watch him live, I did watch a bit of that. Not this one, obviously, but this one, the Sydney Hawthorn game where he went 212, and it was just like he was everywhere. He wasn't really impacting it scoreboard wise. It wasn't looking like a Petrarca type performance, but he just is everywhere. He's the first one to the ball regardless, and he's pretty much the linchpin for Sydney's defensive midfield work. I mean, JPK used to do that back in the day, but obviously he's past his heyday. Parker's getting old as well, and Parker's used more as that Petrarca type role, pushing forward a lot more. But yeah, Mills is someone that I like the look of as a last mid spot. Obviously, I've got McRae. Steele will be obviously someone else this week, and then Mills hopefully will be my M8. Potentially between him, Darcy Parish, and whoever's else is decent enough for that position. But he's definitely one that I think you got to look past, I guess, the odd 70s he can whip out, because he makes it up by getting about 170 the week after. So he's one that if you got him early, well done, because you probably enjoyed the significant price rise. But yeah, he's one that he's past his injury concerns. I think hopefully he doesn't whip out another Achilles injury anytime soon. It's just one that I guess you can't really tell until it's happened. It's we're not there at training. We can't say what happens behind closed doors at Sydney. So who knows what's going on but he looks, if he's getting these kind of disposals and he's confident enough to go head first into the ball and get, 10 tackles plus per game, whatever, you'd be pretty confident his Achilles is okay at this stage.
He seems to be playing a defensive midfielder role. So he seems to be sort of defending the best ball winner at the stoppages and then exposing them going back the other way. So I wouldn't actually be surprised if he manned up on Patrick Crips at the stoppages this week and sort of did a bit of a mini tag on him and then tried to expose him going back the other way. So there's one to keep in mind with Crips for a potential quiet game next week.
Yeah. I think there's no one else that really stands out here. Our opinions on these players mostly have remained unchanged. If you have Caldwell, you trade. If you have Merritt, bit of a concern, but you hold and hope he bounces back. But we'll move on to the next games, Adelaide, Brisbane, and I think we'll speak about Rory Laird. So we touched on him briefly before, but I'll bring this over to you, Nathan. You said Dustin Martin was the number one forward trade-in option for this week. Considering price, would you be bringing him in over Rory Laird if you could choose to fill a midfield or a forward spot?
God, that's a tough. Well, I think I think if you're going forward, I think I'd have Martin at 1. I think if you're going to midfield, I think Laird's the standout choice. Obviously, I think I've flagged this. I did flag this a couple of weeks ago that I was trying to keep him under wraps, and he's basically blown up in my face because I think everyone's going to have him now. But yeah, he's just so consistent. He's just always there. If you look outside his first game, his first game was round 3, got 93. So he's gone 143, 120, 123, 116, 123, 142. So, I mean, you can't get much more consistent than that. He's just about in every centre clearance for Adelaide, along with Ben Keys. So he's always there, and he uses the ball really well. So, yeah, I think Martin's probably the better pick given the price. But if you're going in the midfield, I think Rory Laird's definitely the way to go.
Yeah. All right. And another player who caught my attention a bit from this game was Dane Zorko. Is he someone, Tom, that can come into calculations as a defence option, or is that injury history and age just too much of a factor?
Yeah, he's one that I think.
Well.
Yeah, I guess Nathan can speak a bit more as well, but I believe what's happened is playing more midfield time because Cameron Coleman's back in the side, as that kind of halfback role. Yeah, he's one that I obviously had last year as a forward, and was pretty happy with how he went. I remember bringing him in kind of a week earlier than everyone else and reaped the benefits of him scoring consistent hundreds. I guess the thing with him is the main point with him is he's defence eligible, which makes him more enticing than if he was mid. Obviously, if he was midfield only, it wouldn't take him. But yeah, as a defender, he's going to rack up probably low hundreds more so than high hundreds. There is concern, I guess, old man syndrome. He's getting there in age, and he's always prone to a niggle or two, which doesn't help with Zorko. But yeah, he's one that I probably don't have my eye on. I guess my last 2 spots, I need Stewart at some point, which will come into the buy, most likely if I can afford him. But then the next 2 after that would be probably Dawson and then Sinclair, or someone else. Sicily if he doesn't go any higher. But so those are the 3 that I like to look of ahead of Zorko. But having Zorko in there, I guess, is not too bad just because of how well Brisbane are going. And he just seems to get it. He's also good for like a 150 on the off chance that he does. But I think with him, there's always, from the Brisbane games I've seen at least, there's always some point that he's on a bench resting because of a niggle during the game. So he's always prone to these soft tissue kind of issues, which is a bit of a problem. But yeah, looking at his stats, 26 disposals, 2 goals for 100 is okay. As a defender, you definitely take it. But yeah, there are concerns that a niggle's just around the corner. And I guess, top 6 wise, probably top 8 wise, I'd say ahead of top 6.
Mm-hmm. I think he can get there on average, but total points is a bit of a stretch. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Nathan?
Well, he's playing more in the front half of the minute, and as Thomas touched on, so Coleman obviously coming back in has allowed him to do that. And when he played this role, he consistently racked up 100. So the injury history is a bit of a question mark, but if he stays in this role, I think he can be a top 6 defender going forward for the rest of the year.
Yep, fair enough. All right, we'll move on.
Don't want to touch on Berry, or are we going to kick that down the can?
You should not have him.
Yeah.
Seriously, trade.
Right.
Oh, this game's God. Oh, my God.
Where do we start here?
Where do we start? Well, all right. I think, the players on the Gold Coast side of things did really well. I think Tuke Miller's still an excellent trade-in option. Decided to recapture that form. Now, here's an interesting one I'll throw to you, Tom. Do you think Wits will outscore, in average, Sean Darcy for the rest of the year? And who would you be bringing in if you were
that's
choosing
tough
between
one.
the two?
From
here
let's
on
go. Do they share the same buy or not?
I think Gold Coast round 13. I know Fremantle have the round 14 bye.
Oh, right. Okay. So I'll just read out let's go the next 5 for sake of time. So you got Gold Coast versus the Dogs. So you'd assume Wits tons there against probably an English potential, but underdone English. Obviously, Freo, you'd expect Darcy to score well, but you probably expect Collingwood to bring up some contingency plan to stop Darcy. But you'd expect him both to score 100 there. Round 11, you've got, where is it? Gold Coast playing Hawthorn. Again, Hawthorn don't really have a ruck. They've got Max Lynch. Wits is probably outsmarts him pretty well. Freo play Melbourne, so you've got Gorn to worry about there and a Jackson. So Darcy could have a bit of a problem there, similarly to this game where he just gets outrun and hit-outs to advantage don't really count for that game because, they'll cancel each other out in that sense. Then you've got round 12, Gold Coast play North. Historically, decent rucks actually do quite well against North Melbourne. Like you look at Darcy scored his 170 against Goldstein, and you also had what's his face Gorn score like 200 a couple of years ago against Goldstein. So he's had a pretty good history. And then Freo Lions, McInerney as well. Not an easy gig for Darcy to handle. And you got round 13, you got Freo play Hawthorn, you'd expect Darcy to do well. And then Gold Coast got the bye, and then obviously round 14, Freo have the bye. And then after those two of the bye, you've got Gold Coast play Port, who obviously Port will have still Hayes at that point. And then Freo have Carlton, which maybe Pitney's back, maybe not. If not, you'd expect Darcy to do all right. So I guess looking at that, I think Wits out averages Darcy just. That's off the basis if Darcy doesn't get injured. That's the problem with Darcy. I think, it's a bit concerning that he put up this score against Wits. You'd expect, him to not score as well. Like you wouldn't expect him to score 178 against Wits, but to only score a 50, kind of just exposed his ruck craft a little bit. I think the reason why he was so dominant last year is because he hit it to advantage. And I think against a decent ruckman, and I think more ruckman or more ruck coaches you would expect would have kind of studied up on how Darcy rucks and things like that, because Freo got completely smashed on that game. It just seems like it's a bit of a concern there. I don't know if it was just against a better ruckman on the day in Wits, but hopefully he should bounce back against Collingwood. But I'd say Wits is you'd be crazy to think that because Wits was about 350k or whatever he was at the start of the year. So if you got onto him and stuck with him, you'd be laughing. But he's one that might be a little bit of a concern moving forward just because of, he still hasn't played Gorn and things like that. So he's one to, people do want him before the bye. I know that because people like yourself, Jonas, you brought him in this week, which I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think moving forward it's not going to be a problem, but there might be a few concerns here and there with him because, as I said, injury is the main concern with him with his leg that's constantly strapped up.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, I'll hand this one to you, Nathan. Do you think Brayshaw's a good trade-in target, even after what was a slightly underwhelming score?
Look, I will give Fremantle a defence. Okay, it was a wet game. I'm not sure how many wet games they've probably played in their time in Perth, given it's always hot and sunny over there. So I will give them a cop out. And the fact that they had been up for a few weeks, I think they were always bound to have a down game at some point. So, look, I tossed up between Brayshaw and Miller last week, and I backed in Miller because Miller's been there and done that with the top 8 midfielders before, and Brayshaw... He's a bit of a tease, I think, Brayshaw. He's only there because of his 189. So I think he's unfortunately hasn't been able to take his game to that next level. where he's consistently, doing the 120 scores like a Miller, Oliver, although he had a quiet game as well. McRae, these types of guys. So I think he's still the next rung down. So I said this last week, and I still back what I said in that I think I'd be happy to let him burn me and be a top 8 midfielder because he just hasn't done it before. So yeah, I think going forward, I think he is still a good option, but just be prepared that I don't think he's going to be top 8. He'd probably be around the top 15 mark, I'd say.
Yeah. All right. We'll move on to the next game, which is GWS and Carlton, which is also a bit of a mixed bag. And we'll start with...
Where do we go here as well?
Where do we go? Yeah, we'll start with Tom Green. Scored the 75 with 27 touches. Is this an issue? If we have Tom Green, which I don't think any of us do you think he's one where he's like a last upgrade sort of thing, or can we still ride him out and hope him to be a good enough scorer in the midfield? What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, there's a bit of a concern there with Tom Green. 27 disposals for 75 SuperCoach points is not a good thing. Means he butchered it a fair bit. I guess in his defence, they were just consistently under pressure. Carlton were all over them in the midfield, and just every ball was under pressure. But as Nathan alluded to in our Q&A podcast, I think someone asked the question, whether you had to trade out Green and things like that. I think he's one you can obviously hold. And who knows what happens with a new coach, Mark McVeigh, or not a new coach, but he's stepping into ring coach. Who knows if he spins the magnets a little bit. But he's still a young player. It was, if you were predicting it, you wouldn't be surprised that he'd have a dip in his scoring. You'd be pretty impressed with what you've seen so far. But yeah, he's one that I think if you started in this year at 450k, you'd obviously be happy with the money that you made and be able to keep him on field as a potential keeper. But if you brought him in at a heightened price, thinking he'd be a top 8, I think you probably made the wrong call there. I don't think you'd be, there's so many other midfielders. And obviously, that's the one thing that I guess you got to be a bit careful of when it comes to picking your midfielders, because it's all well and good to pick midfielders sub 550 like Bailey Smith and stuff and go, oh right, they'll be top 8 and finish your mid off quickly. But then when everyone else catches up and they've got their M8 as say Petrarca, then you're in a bit of trouble there.
Yeah, definitely. All right, and we'll bring it on over to two players who really, really got under my skin this week. First one being Whitfield. Is he someone where you trade him at? He's definitely a trade. It's just now a matter of when. Can you afford to hold him up until the buys, or do you think that with the fact that he plays West Coast this week and Leon Cameron's out of the coaching box, is he one where you can sort of wait and see on and see if he can go back in the back line and start scoring some points? What do you think, Nathan?
Look, unfortunately, I'm a Whitfield owner. I think you are as well, Jonas. So I think, look, he's a roller coaster. He's definitely one I'm going to get rid of at the buys.
Okay.
I think if you've got a perfect side, you've got nothing else you need to worry about. You've got all your rookies off the field. Get rid of him. But I guess if you still got, say, Carroll or I don't know, or like someone like that, Rioli on the field, you've probably got to prioritise getting them off before getting rid of Whitfield, unfortunately. But yeah, I think he's got to go. Whitfield. He's just not having a consistent role.
11.
I think
11.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with Whitfield is I had a look. So the last couple of weeks, he was having like 400-500 meters gained by his disposals, and that's the Whitfield that we know. But I had a look midway through the third quarter, and he only had like 120 meters gained or something. So I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on there. The last couple of weeks, I said he might be back, but then he goes and pulls out this 43 again. So, yeah, I don't think you would want him in your final side. So yeah, I think get rid of him. If you can hold him to the buys, I think he's probably going to hopefully score better than 43 until the buys, and then see you later.
Yeah. And onto Cogs. Tom, is this a player you can trade out, or similarly to Whitfield, do you hold on to the buys? He copped a bit of a knock to the back, I think, by Doherty, so he might be in slight doubt for this week. But if he plays, is he one you're definitely holding?
Yeah, he was on the trade table this week if it wasn't for Steele, I think. Still could be traded out alongside Steele, because I think the likes of DeConning and Dacos playing in defence have been pretty impressive up to this date, holding out and still producing some solid scores that are fieldable. Cogs is one that is interesting because it seemed like in the last couple of weeks he played a lot more time forward, as we mentioned in the previous podcast. But the silver lining is he plays West Coast at home on a Sunday, so he could be quite good this week, I think. I just have a sneaky feeling that a lot of people can trade him out, and this is a week that he goes bang and scores a 130, 140 against a pretty shit West Coast. So who knows what will happen, but I think if you trade him out, I wouldn't blame you because, they play Brisbane the week after. So, he's one that I think has to go. A lot of people thought that,
he's got a break even of 146 this week.
Yeah, so he's one that I guess that's the only concern, because he's going to drop a fair bit in cash, which is a problem. But it's more he's one that because he's not like a Rosas or something where he started at like a 123 and he pumped out some shit scores and all of a sudden he's not making money. I think you probably afford. For me, like if you're in a situation like myself where you have Steele and things like that to worry about, I guess it's not the worst situation in the world. The West Coast is the next team in line, and they want to bounce back pretty hard with a new coach in sight. So who knows? He's one that I guess you wouldn't go against trading him definitely this week if you had to.
Yeah. Anything you want to touch on the Carlton side of things, Nathan, or nothing really sticks out of the ordinary?
Well, I was happy that George Hewitt was on like only 50 or the half time, and then he ended up with 121. So he just keeps burning me, even though he hasn't played the last couple of weeks. I guess we'll touch quickly on Patrick Crips. Any concern here, Jonas, with Patrick Crips, or just a bit of an off day?
Not really any concerns. Slight off day, I'd say. Started the game really slowly, then warmed into it in the second quarter, had like 13 touches, and then sort of faded out a bit more. I think the way he plays, like he's just going to rack up points. So, look, if he goes next week 70, I'll slightly forgive him again because of the Mills thing. But if he goes sub 85 3 weeks straight, then maybe we'll have to look at what's going on there. But for now, I'm not too fast. I think he'll pull out a good score next week and ease any slight concerns we have. We've definitely got bigger problems than an 83 from Crips. So yeah, that's that.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough too. Well, we'll go to the last game.
This game was sort of interesting. The thing I've noticed is, I don't know if you agree with this, but it's not necessarily the case that if you come up against an easy beat team, you're going to score well, because when the game's on the line, and by the line, I mean is up for grabs in the first quarter, that's when most of the points are scored in these sort of games. And what I noticed here as well was a lot of these players who scored poorly, e.g. Gorn, scored poorly because of their first quarter. Gorn was on like 6 at quarter time, the game was basically over, and every little possession he got after that, it wasn't as valuable, which meant it wasn't worth as many points. You look at Jackson, for example, he was on like 45 a quarter time, and Gorn far outplayed him for the next 3 quarters. But because of the fact that Jackson had played a lot better when the game was on the line, he got scaled up and got the 99. Same with Oliver. He got a fair bit of the ball, but a lot of this came after the game was decided, and so a lot of these points weren't worth a lot. And whilst 99's probably a bit unders, he definitely didn't deserve a 130 for his game. So I think the notion of assuming that, I'm just going to captain someone, they're playing West Coast, he's guaranteed a 200. Not necessarily always the case. I think it's better to look at teams like going against Eston and Adelaide, who are half easy to score against because they're somewhat competitive but don't really tag, is a much better idea because the game can still be up for grabs where the players can score the points. That's just my 2 cents on that, but we'll start with Max Gorn. Are you both owners or just you, Tom?
Yeah, I think Nathan's.
No, I've got him.
Yeah,
I had him as captain.
Yeah, Nathan captain him.
Oh, that's right. Well, I'll bring this one on to you, Nathan. I assume you may have watched some of the game if you captained him. What were your thoughts on his performance?
Well, I don't know why I kept him in. I said this out from the outset. I don't know why he's in under an injury cloud. I guess it was just the idea that he was rucking against. I couldn't even tell you who West Coast ruckman is. Looks like it's Williamson Jamison. So I thought he might dominate the hit-outs, which he did. But it didn't necessarily convert into scoring. So, yeah, I will actually go along with what you said, though, Jonas, about these easy beat sides like West Coast, and perhaps not expecting as big as scores because, yeah, the game was on the line at the start, and obviously as the game gets further and further away, there's less and less points that are going to get like scaled to you for doing better stuff as opposed to at the start. So, yeah, I think it's just a bit of an off week for Max. I'm not too concerned about him. I wouldn't be going and trading him. And yeah, I think Melbourne next week have who do Melbourne have next week? Oh, they have North Melbourne. So he's probably going to be against a little bit better ruckman in Goldstein. And it is back in Melbourne. So yeah, I think. Is that in Melbourne? I actually don't know.
It should be. Don't know why it'd be interstate for 2 Victorian clubs.
It says MR, which is a little bit odd. I would have thought it would be in, unless they're playing the game in Darwin because it's Indigenous week next week. No, it's at Marvel. Okay. So yeah, so I think I think Gorn's probably gonna be back again next week. But yeah, don't go trading him out.
Yeah. One I'd probably wait on, get him in when he falls a bit in price if you don't have.
His break even's 221, so definitely don't be trading him in.
Yeah. And we'll move on to the other side of the coin, which is West Coast. Is Greg Clark a must-have, Tom?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yep.
It seems like it's one that you kind of need to have more so for putting a decent rookie on field. He seems a pretty mature age body. Hopefully, I think he had shoulder issues potentially before he came into the side. I think that's why it was stopping him from coming in. But like a 62 off 13 disposals, I think he just uses the ball really well and does all the good things around the ball. It doesn't really muck it up too much because I think he didn't have too many disposals as well the week before for 110. So yeah, he's definitely one I think you must have purely for the case that he's compared to the likes of Hamilton, Carroll and Rioli, you'd be much more confident with having Clark on field. And I think, looking at matchups as well, next week when they play GWS. It's something I think that Adam Simpson would be pretty adamant on a chance of actually winning this game against GWS. It could really, a bit of reward for their hard work with regards to all their players missing, but really, ruin any chances that GWS have making finals if they had any to start with. So, yeah, I'd say Clark is a must-have. I'd be pretty safe to put him at M8, if you need to upgrade other spots before you finalise your team.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, that's all we got time for this week. Bit of a mixed bag of results.
Very much.
Some players scoring well, some not so much, but we'll see you in the Q&A and have a
Enjoy
good
your week.
Yeah, we'll catch you until then.